Courtney, that was bloody fantastic.
Thank you.
Let me tell you something, Courtney. Something has changed in you. Trust me. In the time you were on the show last year to now, your interaction with the audience, the confidence. I think this has been my favourite performance of you so far.
There are moments in television history that stop time. Moments where the air in the room changes, where even the most guarded person in the building forgets to put their walls back up. For Simon Cowell, a man who has built an empire on emotional detachment, who has turned saying no into an art form, who has sat stone-faced through thousands of auditions without so much as a flicker of genuine feeling crossing his face, those moments are extraordinarily rare. But Courtney Hadwin was not an ordinary moment. She was not an ordinary anything. When a 13-year-old girl from a tiny mining village in County Durham walked onto the America's Got Talent stage in 2018, she looked exactly like what she was, a nervous child. Quiet, small, almost swallowed whole by the enormity of the stage around her. And then she opened her mouth, and the entire world shifted on its axis. What came out of that girl was not what anyone expected. It was thunder wrapped in silk. It was decades of blues and soul channeled through a teenager who had no business sounding the way she did. Simon Cowell, the man who never cries, the man who built his reputation on being unshakable, looked like he had been physically struck. And that reaction told you everything you needed to know about what Courtney Hadwin was capable of. But here is the part of the story that nobody warned you about. Here is the chapter that the highlight reels and the viral videos tend to skip over. What happened to Courtney Hadwin after that stage? What happened after Simon signed her? After the confetti fell? After the cameras moved on to the next sensation? And why, years later, is there growing conversation about Simon Cowell himself being moved to tears when confronted with the reality of how her story unfolded? Today, we are going to walk through all of it. The rise, the fracture, the silence, and the remarkable resurrection of one of the most genuinely talented young artists the music industry has seen in a generation. To understand what happened to Courtney Hadwin, you have to understand where she came from. Not in a vague, hand-wavy sense, but truly understand it. Hesleden is a former mining village near Hartlepool in the northeast of England. It is the kind of place where community runs deep and where a person's roots are not something they leave behind easily. Courtney was born on July 6, 2004, and grew up there with her parents, Paul and Anne-Marie, and her younger siblings. It was not a glamorous upbringing by any stretch of the imagination, but it was a real one, grounded in love and hard work and the particular kind of resilience that small northern English towns tend to produce in their people. Music found Courtney early, the way it tends to find people who are genuinely meant for it. She was not pushed into it. She gravitated toward it naturally, singing at home, exploring her voice with the kind of unself-conscious joy that only children possess before the world starts telling them what they should and should not be. She has spoken about watching Connie Talbot perform on Britain's Got Talent as a young girl and feeling something click inside her, a recognition that singing was not just something she enjoyed, but something she needed. By the time she was around 9 or 10, she had started singing with serious intention. At 11, she performed at a school open mic, delivering a rendition of a well-known ballad that left her classmates genuinely stunned. Someone filmed it, put it on Facebook, and the local response was immediate. People who knew her could not quite believe what they were hearing. Her grandfather later shared that she began busking in local spaces to help fund her singing lessons, standing out in the cold with her voice as her only currency. That detail alone tells you something essential about Courtney Hadwin. She was not handed anything. She worked for every single note. Her family worked alongside her. Her father took on extra jobs, delivering pizzas, doing whatever was necessary to cover the travel costs that came with chasing auditions across the Northeast. Her mother became her most vocal champion. Together, they created an environment in which Courtney's gift was treated not as a commodity, but as something sacred and worth protecting. That family foundation would later become the single most important thing standing between Courtney and complete collapse. She entered competitions, won regional awards, performed at festivals, and by 2017 was appearing on The Voice Kids UK, where her ferocious stage presence announced to anyone paying attention that something genuinely extraordinary was happening. She was still only a child, but the voice that came out of her carried the weight of lived experience that should have been impossible for someone her age to possess. When America's Got Talent producers reached out seeking international talent ahead of season 13, Courtney Hadwin was exactly the kind of discovery they were looking for. She was 13 years old, relatively unknown outside of Northern England and some regional UK television, and completely unprepared for what was about to happen to her life. She walked out onto that stage in 2018 looking nervous enough to run, and then she sang, and the world lost its mind. Her performance, all raw energy and gritty vocal power and full-body abandon, was unlike anything the AGT audience had witnessed before. Howie Mandel slammed the golden buzzer before she had even finished, sending gold confetti raining down around a girl who looked genuinely bewildered by what was happening to her. He compared her to Janis Joplin, one of the most revered voices in rock and blues history, and the comparison did not feel like an exaggeration. It felt earned. Simon Cowell's reaction became the moment everyone talked about afterward. A man not known for showing emotion sat there with his composure visibly cracked, calling her a lion in a child's body. That description stuck. It traveled around the world with the video clip, which accumulated hundreds of millions of views within days. 310 million views. That is not a number that belongs in a sentence about a 13-year-old girl from a small village in County Durham. And yet there it was. She advanced through the competition, delivering performance after performance that blurred the line between child prodigy and seasoned professional. She ultimately placed 6th overall, a result that surprised many viewers who had expected her to take the title. But 6th place on America's Got Talent when you have already racked up hundreds of millions of views is not a defeat. It is a launching pad. And Simon Cowell, recognizing exactly what he had in front of him, signed Courtney to his Psycho music label in partnership with Arista Records shortly after the season ended. She was 14 years old. For a moment, everything looked like a fairy tale. The shy girl from Hesleden had walked into the biggest talent show in the world and walked out with a record deal from the most powerful figure in the entertainment industry. What could possibly go wrong? The music industry is not designed for 14-year-old girls, no matter how extraordinary their voices happen to be. It is a machine built by adults, run by adults, and optimized to generate revenue as efficiently as possible. Talent is the raw material that gets fed into the machine, and what comes out the other end is supposed to be a marketable product. For most adults who enter that machine, the experience is disorienting enough. For a teenager still navigating homework and homesickness, it was something else entirely. Courtney has spoken openly, in more recent years, about what those early months and years under the label felt like from the inside. The studio sessions were relentless and impersonal. She would arrive to find teams of producers, songwriting professionals, and label executives ready to shape her into a specific mold, a polished pop-soul crossover artist who could generate streaming numbers and radio plays. The problem was that this version of Courtney bore very little resemblance to the girl who had stood on that AGT stage and turned herself inside out in front of millions of viewers. That girl was raw and unfiltered and completely herself. What the label wanted was something more manageable. She described feeling like a character being directed, rather than an artist being supported. Writing sessions involved bending to themes and sounds that did not reflect her emotional reality. The gritty, soulful instincts that had made her extraordinary were being smoothed away, session by session, deadline by deadline. She was flying back and forth between the UK and the United States, perpetually jet-lagged, perpetually surrounded by adults telling her who she needed to be, perpetually performing a version of herself that felt increasingly hollow. And underneath all of that professional pressure was a very normal teenager who missed home, who missed her friends, who missed the simplicity of life before the world knew her name. She later described feeling isolated in a way that was genuinely painful, not lonely in the dramatic sense, but lonely in the quiet way that happens when you are surrounded by people who are invested in your success but not particularly interested in your well-being. There is a particular kind of loneliness that comes with being managed rather than known, and Courtney experienced it acutely during those years. The mental exhaustion mounted. The creative frustration mounted. The gap between who she was and who she was being asked to perform as widened into something she could no longer comfortably bridge. And so, gradually, she began to step back. It happened slowly enough that many fans did not notice at first. The social media posts became less frequent. The promotional appearances dried up. The buzz that had surrounded her name since the AGT audition faded from a roar to a murmur to a silence that felt, to those paying attention, genuinely alarming. Where was Courtney Hadwin? What had happened to the lion? Speculation filled the vacuum. Rumors circulated about illness, about personal crisis, about falling outs with the label, about accidents that may or may not have occurred. The absence of any clear communication from Courtney or those representing her allowed the rumor mills to spin freely, and spin they did. Fans who had watched that audition video hundreds of times found themselves anxiously scanning for any sign of life, any indication that the girl they had cheered for was all right. The reality was both simpler and more complicated than any of the rumors. Courtney was not gone. She was retreating. Retreating from the pressure, from the expectations, from the version of herself that the industry had been trying to construct. She was going home, in every sense of the word, back to County Durham, back to her family, back to the quiet and the realness that had made her who she was before a golden buzzer changed her life. And during that retreat, something important happened. She started to remember what music actually felt like when she was in control of it. She started writing again, not for labels or executives or streaming algorithms, but for herself. She started rebuilding her relationship with her own voice, stripping away everything that had been layered on top of it and finding, underneath it all, that the original thing was still there. Still fierce. Still honest. Still entirely her own. Simon Cowell moved on. That is the nature of his role in the industry. He spots talent, he signs talent, he promotes talent, and then he moves on to the next audition, the next season, the next discovery. He is not a mentor in the personal sense of that word. He is an executive, and executives operate within a system that was never designed to nurture young artists through the psychological complexities of early fame. Nobody blamed him, exactly. But nobody could ignore the fact that the man who had called her a lion had, in the end, watched that lion get put in a cage he had helped build. Courtney never spoke publicly with bitterness about Simon. She was too grounded for that, too self-aware about how the